There are places in America where you're not allowed to fly a plane, snap a photograph, or in some cases even linger with a pair of binoculars. Spots patrolled by armed guards, watched by hidden sensors, and protected by rules strict enough that getting too curious can get you detained before you even understand what you did wrong. So today, we're counting down the 10 most guarded places in America you're forbidden to even look at. Number 10. Plum Island Animal Disease Center, New York. 3 miles off the tip of Long Island's North Fork sits an 840-acre island that most maps quietly leave blank. Plum Island doesn't show up on the ferry schedules the way the Hamptons do, and that's not an accident. Since 1954, it's been home to the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, a federal research lab run jointly by the Department of Homeland Security and the USDA. Its job sounds almost boring on paper. Study the diseases that could wipe out American livestock before those diseases ever reach American livestock. Foot and mouth disease, African swine fever, the kind of pathogens that, if they got loose on a cattle ranch in Nebraska, could tank the agricultural economy in a matter of weeks. The island itself functions like a one-way filter. Boats bring workers in, and everyone who leaves goes through decontamination, showers, protocols, sometimes even inspection of their shoes. For decades, Plum Island operated as a Biosafety Level 3 facility, one tier below the maximum containment reserved for the deadliest pathogens on Earth. And even that classification made the place feel less like an office building and more like a sealed vault with livestock pens in it. Naturally, isolation breeds rumor. Because Plum Island is so close to Lyme, Connecticut, the town that gave Lyme disease its name, a persistent theory has circulated for decades that ticks somehow escaped the lab and started the outbreak. There's no verified evidence connecting the two. It's speculation that's been repeated so often it started to sound like fact. But the government has never fully quieted it, mostly because so little about what actually happens on Plum Island gets said out loud in the first place. The lab is in the process of shutting down entirely, with its work relocating to a newer, higher security facility in Manhattan, Kansas, one built to eventually handle Biosafety Level 4 pathogens, the most dangerous classification that exists in the world of infectious disease research. That transition has been underway for years and is expected to run through 2028, which means Plum Island's decades-long run as one of the least visited, least photographed pieces of land on the East Coast is finally coming to a close. For over 70 years, though, if you wanted to get near Plum Island, your best option was staying on the ferry and looking the other way. Even the old lighthouse on the island's edge, a genuinely historic structure that predates the lab by a century, isn't something the public gets to walk up to. It just sits there, visible from passing boats, guarded by the same quiet perimeter as everything else on the island. Number 9. Kirtland Underground Munitions Maintenance and Storage Complex, New Mexico. Just outside Albuquerque, tucked into the base of the Manzano Mountains, sits what is, according to declassified assessments, the largest nuclear weapons storage facility on the planet. The Kirtland Underground Munitions Maintenance and Storage Complex, mercifully shortened to KUMMSC by everyone who has to say it out loud, opened in 1992, built to replace an older Cold War-era facility literally carved into the mountain itself. More than 300,000 square feet of the complex sits entirely underground, and unlike a lot of Cold War relics that eventually got mothballed or turned into tourist attractions, this one is still very much active. It's managed by the Air Force's 898th Munitions Squadron, alongside a dedicated weapons security squadron whose entire job is making sure nobody gets near the inventory. And the inventory, by most public estimates, includes B-61 and B-83 gravity bombs, along with W-80 and W-87 warheads, meaning at any given moment, a meaningful chunk of the American nuclear arsenal is sitting under a mountain outside a city best known for hot air balloons and green chili. The base predates the complex by decades. Kirtland traces back to the Manhattan Project era, when it served as a staging point for the atomic bomb components eventually used over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A special Manhattan District Military Police unit was assigned specifically to guard the bombs as they moved down from the Los Alamos laboratory for loading onto modified B-29 bombers. And permanent nuclear storage arrived at the site in 1949 under the codename Site Able. That original facility, Manzano Base, was carved directly into the mountain itself. Tunnels, vertical sidewalls, arched concrete roofs, an underground assembly plant where technicians once put nuclear weapon components together by hand. It ran for more than 40 years before KUMMSC took over in the early 1990s, consolidating everything into a newer, more centralized underground complex just outside the old mountain. Even now, security here isn't the kind of thing you test by wandering too close to the fence line. Multiple perimeter layers, restricted airspace, dedicated weapons security squadrons, and a posture built around the assumption that this is one of the single highest value nuclear targets in the country for anyone who might want to cause the worst kind of trouble. Because of a persistent backlog of warheads awaiting dismantlement at the Pantex facility in Texas, some assessments have ranked Kirtland as holding more nuclear warheads at any given time than any other single site on Earth. A fairly remarkable distinction for a facility most Albuquerque residents drive past without a second thought. Number 8. Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center, Virginia. About 50 miles west of Washington, D.C., in the Blue Ridge foothills near the town of Bluemont, there's a mountain that started its government career as a place to launch weather balloons. The National Weather Bureau bought the land back in 1893 for exactly that purpose. What it eventually became is a different story entirely. Mount Weather is now one of the country's core continuity of government sites, a facility designed to keep the federal government functioning if Washington itself became unusable. It's operated today by FEMA, and the above-ground buildings you can actually see from outside look almost mundane. A cluster of structures connected by communication links straight to the White House Situation Room. What's underground is the part nobody talks about in detail. Estimates put the underground space at several 100,000 square feet, built into side tunnels, with office buildings up to 3 stories tall carved into the rock, sleeping quarters, a sewage treatment plant, and enough infrastructure to support hundreds of people for weeks without needing anything from the outside world. Reports on the facility's continuity planning describe senior officials being divided into teams with names like Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. One group staying in Washington, another relocating to Mount Weather itself, and a third dispersing to other backup sites entirely, all so that no single event could wipe out the entire chain of command at once. The facility is designed to accommodate several thousand people in a genuine emergency, with sleeping cots for around 2,000, though only the president, the cabinet, and the Supreme Court were reportedly given private quarters. Everyone else would be making do with considerably less privacy. The facility has only been fully activated a couple of times in its history, most famously during the 1965 Northeast blackout, when millions of people lost power and officials needed a functioning nerve center that wasn't dependent on the failing grid. After September 11th, congressional leaders were reportedly relocated here as part of the continuity plan, though the government has never gone into much detail about who went where that day or for how long. Getting anywhere near Mount Weather uninvited is its own kind of education. The perimeter security doesn't particularly care whether you're lost, curious, or just really into hiking. People have learned that the hard way for decades, usually via a very direct conversation with an armed guard who appeared faster than seemed physically possible. Number 7. Raven Rock Mountain Complex, Pennsylvania. If Mount Weather is the government's backup plan for civilians, Raven Rock is the military's version, and it comes with its own nickname, the Underground Pentagon. Built into a mountain near Blue Ridge Summit, Pennsylvania, right on the Maryland border, Raven Rock was conceived under President Harry Truman as a secure relocation site for the Department of Defense in case Washington ever took a direct hit. Construction started in 1951, and what came out of the mountain by 1953 was a self-contained complex capable of housing thousands of military personnel, complete with its own power, water, and communications infrastructure. Reports describe blast doors weighing over 30 tons apiece, tunnels running hundreds of feet long specifically engineered to absorb and dissipate the shockwave from a nearby explosion, and interior buildings designed to resemble ordinary three-story offices, except they're sitting inside a hollowed-out mountain instead of a business park. Raven Rock officially houses the alternate National Military Command Center, meaning if the actual Pentagon ever goes offline, this is where Military Command Authority is supposed to continue operating. The complex reportedly spans more than 80,000 square meters of interior space once you're past the blast doors. Office space, dormitories, a medical ward, even restaurants, with capacity estimates ranging anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 personnel depending on the source. It sits close enough to the presidential retreat at Camp David that the two facilities are sometimes discussed almost as a matched set, one for the president's downtime, one for the military's worst-case scenario. Vice President Dick Cheney reportedly spent time here in the hours and days following the September 11th attacks, part of a broader effort to keep the executive branch's chain of command intact no matter what happened in the Capitol. It remains staffed today, decades after the Cold War rationale that justified its construction technically ended, because the underlying logic never really went away. Governments like having a backup plan, and backup plans built into a mountain tend to age fairly well. Today, it's illegal to photograph, sketch, or map the complex without specific authorization, a rule that applies whether you're a tourist with a phone camera or someone with far more serious intentions. Number 6. NSA Utah Data Center, Bluffdale. Not every guarded location in America involves mountains or gold. Some of them are just very, very large buildings that store something you can't see, touch, or even fully define: data. The National Security Agency's Utah Data Center, nicknamed Bumblehive, sits on roughly 1 million square feet of land at Camp Williams near Bluffdale, and it became operational in 2013 as part of a broader national cybersecurity initiative. The building itself isn't much to look at from a distance: long, low, industrial. What makes it worth guarding is what's presumably happening inside. Massive-scale data processing and storage tied to national intelligence operations, running on tens of megawatts of constant power, enough electricity by some estimates to run tens of thousands of homes. The facility reportedly runs on Cray supercomputers capable of well over 100 trillion calculations per second. And while the NSA has never confirmed exactly how much data the center can hold, Utah's own governor once publicly floated the word yottabyte back in 2012, which is a unit of measurement so large that most people, including plenty of engineers, have to look it up. The complex is built to keep running no matter what happens to the surrounding power grid. 60 diesel-fueled emergency generators on site, enough fuel reserves to keep the whole operation going for 3 straight days without outside help, water treatment facilities, chiller plants, and its own electrical substation. It reportedly cost somewhere between $1.5 and $3 billion to build, depending on which estimate you trust, and construction alone took years to complete before it went fully operational in 2014. Unlike a nuclear storage site or a mountain bunker, Bumblehive's danger isn't physical. You're not going to get hurt walking near the fence, and there's no blast door waiting to crush you on the way in. But the secrecy is just as absolute. What's actually stored there, how long it's kept, and precisely what it's used for remain some of the least publicly understood details of any facility on this list, protected less by concrete and steel and more by classification stamps that outlast entire presidential administrations. Number 5. The White House Situation Room, Washington, D.C. Everyone's seen a photograph of it, that cramped, wood-paneled conference room where a small group of very serious-looking people watched the raid on Osama bin Laden's compound unfold in real time back in 2011. But the Situation Room itself is one of the most restricted rooms in the entire country, tucked into the basement level of the West Wing, and almost nothing about its actual capabilities has ever been made public in detail. Established during the Kennedy administration, after the Bay of Pigs disaster exposed serious gaps in the president's ability to get real-time intelligence, the Situation Room has been renovated and modernized multiple times since, most notably in 2006 and again in 2023. What's known publicly is limited to the basics. It functions as a 24/7 intelligence watch center staffed by personnel from the National Security Council, connected to secure communications networks that link the president to military commanders, intelligence agencies, and allied governments anywhere on Earth at any hour. Getting into the Situation Room requires security clearance that very few people on the planet actually hold. And even White House staff without a specific reason to be there don't wander in out of curiosity. It's a small room by government standards, and that's sort of the point. It was built to be a fast, secure nerve center, not a showpiece for visiting dignitaries. Despite the name suggesting a single dramatic room, it's really more of a suite, with several smaller conference and communication spaces branching off the main room, each one built for a different level of classified conversation. The details of what technology actually sits inside those walls, what's visible on those screens on any given day, remain almost entirely unknown outside a very short list of people who've signed their names to a great deal of paperwork. Even the famous 2011 photograph showing officials crowded around a table watching the bin Laden raid was later described by some of the people in it as capturing only a sliver of what was actually happening. A single frozen moment from hours of tense, largely undocumented activity inside a room the public will likely never see in person. Number 4. Federal Reserve Bank of New York Gold Vault. 80 feet below the streets of Lower Manhattan, resting directly on the bedrock of the island itself, sits what's widely regarded as the largest known accumulation of gold anywhere on Earth. The vault at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York currently holds somewhere around 500,000 gold bars, weighing in at more than 6,000 metric tons combined. And at today's prices, that's a number that runs into the hundreds of billions of dollars. Here's the part that tends to surprise people. None of that gold belongs to the Federal Reserve. The bank simply acts as custodian, holding it on behalf of foreign governments, central banks, and international organizations who'd rather store their reserves on Manhattan bedrock than risk keeping them at home. The vault holdings peaked back in 1973, shortly after the US dropped the gold standard at over 12,000 tons, more than double what's stored there today. The security specs sound almost theatrical until you remember they're real. A 90-ton steel door, shaped like a cylinder, rotates into place to seal the entrance. There is no straight hallway in or out, just a sealed chamber that has to align perfectly before anyone can pass through. Each gold bar weighs about 27 pounds, despite being roughly the size of a water bottle. Dense enough that vault workers reportedly wear special magnesium-lined footwear just to handle the physical strain of moving them by hand. Inside, the vault is broken into 122 separate compartments, one for each depositing country, plus a smaller library vault reserved for account holders with more modest reserves. The largest single compartment reportedly holds more than 100,000 bars stacked into what amounts to a literal wall of gold. And according to one widely cited tour breakdown, if someone actually tried to tunnel in from the nearest subway station, which sits just 100 feet away and 30 feet above the vault, the vibration from drilling alone would be detected long before anyone got through, even with the most powerful diamond-tipped equipment available. The building was designed in the early 1920s with all of this in mind, engineered specifically to rest on Manhattan's bedrock because that was the only foundation strong enough to support the combined weight of a 90-ton door, a 140-ton door frame, and thousands of tons of gold. It's a bank vault built less like a bank and more like a fortress that happens to also process wire transfers. Number 3. Cheyenne Mountain Complex, Colorado. Buried under roughly 2,000 feet of solid granite outside Colorado Springs sits the closest thing America has to a real-life Cold War bunker straight out of a movie, because frankly, it was one. Cheyenne Mountain has appeared in war games, inspired parts of Stargate, and become something close to shorthand in pop culture for the underground military command center. The difference is, this one actually exists, and it's still operational. Built between 1961 and 1966 at a cost north of $140 million, the complex required excavating nearly 700,000 tons of granite to create 3 massive chambers, each big enough to house multiple 3-story steel buildings. Those buildings don't sit directly on the rock floor. They're mounted on more than 1,000 giant springs designed to absorb the shock of a nearby nuclear detonation. The entrance is protected by 2 blast doors, each weighing roughly 25 tons, capable of sealing shut in under a minute. NORAD Deputy Director Steve Rose once put it plainly, "We like to say it's the most secure facility in the world." Those doors have only been sealed once outside of routine testing and Cold War drills. The morning of September 11th, 2001, while NORAD personnel happened to already be inside running a training exercise when real hijacked aircraft entered American airspace. Former NORAD Chief of Plans Stephen Armstrong later recalled being in the mountain that very morning, describing the surreal shift from a scheduled drill to an actual national emergency happening in real time. Cheyenne Mountain served as NORAD's primary command post for decades, tracking Soviet bombers and later ballistic missiles, at its peak staffed by close to 1,800 personnel working around the clock. Approximately 200 people from the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, and Canadian Forces still staff the operations centers today, monitoring aerospace activity on banks of screens deep inside the granite. The facility remains entirely self-sufficient, with more than 6 million gallons of water stored in pools carved directly into the rock and its own independent power supply, engineered to keep functioning for up to 30 days without any outside assistance. Operations officially shifted to nearby Peterson Air Force Base in 2006, but the mountain never fully went dark. Rising concerns about cyber attacks and electromagnetic pulse weapons brought staff back inside in 2015 on the reasoning that older, isolated Cold War-era systems are, ironically, harder to hack than anything wired into a modern network. About 20,000 tourists reportedly visit the surrounding area each year, though visiting mostly means looking at a mountain from a respectful distance, not touring the inside of an active military command post. Number 2. Fort Knox, United States Bullion Depository, Kentucky. If Hollywood needed a shorthand for a place you cannot get into, it picked Fort Knox decades ago, and the real facility has spent just as long living up to the reputation. The United States Bullion Depository has stored gold reserves since 1937, built from 16,000 cubic feet of granite, over 4,000 cubic yards of concrete, and hundreds of tons of structural steel. From the outside, it looks almost disappointingly plain, a squat Depression-era government building, nothing like the sleek high-security set from Goldfinger. The vault door alone tells you what you need to know. 21 inches of blast, drill, and torch-resistant steel, weighing more than 20 tons, set on a time lock that takes 100 hours to reset, meaning even with the correct combination, nobody's opening that door on a whim. No single person holds the full combination. The approach to the vault runs through a narrow tunnel you'd have to crawl through, and even the emergency escape route only opens from the inside. For most of its history, almost nobody outside authorized personnel ever saw what was inside. President Franklin Roosevelt inspected it once in 1943. Then, in 1974, facing years of rumors that the gold had quietly vanished, the Treasury Department finally let in 130 journalists and members of Congress to prove otherwise. One local news anchor who made that trip described walking past guards armed with submachine guns before stepping through a 3-foot-thick steel door into a room stacked 8 feet high with numbered gold bars, standing within arm's reach of what was, at the time, well over $1 billion in bullion. Mint Director Mary Brooks told the group afterward, "We've never done this before, and we'll probably never do it again." And she was almost right. It took 43 years for the next inspection, when Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin toured the vaults in 2017 alongside Kentucky's governor and a handful of lawmakers, including Senator Mitch McConnell, who later joked that the value sitting in front of him barely registered compared to federal budget numbers he dealt with daily. Outside of those handful of exceptions, spanning nearly 90 years, the only people who've ever laid eyes on Fort Knox's gold are the people whose job it is to guard it. A group that, by design, has always been kept very, very small. Number 1, Area 51, Nevada. And here's the one that started the whole genre of what is the government hiding in the first place. Area 51 sits inside the Nevada Test and Training Range, roughly 100 miles northwest of Las Vegas, and for most of the 20th century, the US government wouldn't even confirm the site had a name, let alone what happened there. The reality, once the CIA finally declassified its history in 2013, turned out to be almost stranger than the alien theories that filled the vacuum for decades. Area 51, nicknamed Paradise Ranch internally, just to make an isolated desert posting sound more appealing to the engineers stationed there, was built starting in 1955 as a testing ground for the U-2 spy plane, a reconnaissance aircraft designed to photograph Soviet military installations from an altitude of 60,000 feet, higher than any aircraft had ever flown. The first unofficial flight happened almost by accident that August, when Lockheed's chief test pilot became airborne during what was supposed to be a routine taxi test. From there, the site became the testing ground for the A-12 Oxcart, a Mach 3 capable successor to the U-2, and later the F-117 stealth fighter. Aircraft so far ahead of anything else flying at the time that a sighting from the ground genuinely did look otherworldly to people with no context for what they were looking at. That's not speculation. It's the government's own explanation for why the UFO reports piled up for decades. Sleek, silent, impossibly fast aircraft, glinting at altitudes nobody expected anything to fly at, moving in ways nothing else in the sky could match. National Security Archive researcher Jeffrey Richelson, who spent years trying to pry the details loose through records requests, said the 2013 release marks an end to official secrecy about the facts of Area 51. Except it doesn't, not really. The CIA's declassified history conveniently stops in 1974, and the site's role under Air Force control since then remains almost entirely unconfirmed to this day. Area 51 sits inside the much larger Nevada National Security Site, which itself is nested within the even larger Nellis Air Force Range, an area of restricted desert that spans thousands of square miles, meaning the buffer zone alone is bigger than some entire states. The surrounding airspace is still off-limits to civilian aircraft. The perimeter is still watched by hidden cameras and ground sensors well before you'd ever get close to an actual fence, and signs along the access roads plainly warn that deadly force is authorized against anyone who trespasses. Access to the base was historically handled almost entirely by air, with a daily unmarked shuttle flight ferrying personnel and cargo in from Burbank, California, specifically so workers never had to drive in and risk being seen or followed. Decades after the first sighting reports, Area 51 has become such a fixture of American pop culture that in 2019, over 2 million people jokingly signed up for a Facebook event to storm the base, an event that, unsurprisingly, resulted in almost nobody actually showing up, and the handful who did getting nowhere near the fence line, let alone whatever's still sitting on the other side of it. So there you have it. 10 places across this country where the fences aren't decorative, the warning signs aren't exaggerating, and looking too long through a pair of binoculars can genuinely ruin your day. Some of these guard gold. Some guard weapons capable of ending civilizations. A couple of them just guard secrets that the people in charge have decided, for one reason or another, the rest of us don't get to have. If you enjoyed this rundown, hit like, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and let us know in the comments which one of these 10 you'd most want to sneak a look inside.